Good morning, America. It is good to be with everyone today. My name is Luke Willis, and my thesis is on the failure of the modern American suburb and the necessity for an accessible third place. In nearly 250 years, the United States has become a dominant world power. From the Declaration of Independence in 1776 to the ratification of the U.S. Constitution in 1788, to the skyscrapers of New York City, to the rural towns scattered across the nation, the United States of America is the greatest country on earth. One can be reminded of this sentiment, as in the dewy mist of a brisk fall morning, a man prepares for another day of work. This man is young to the promises of the American dream, as he excitedly prepares to become a new parent. He and his wife live in a cookie-cutter home within a newly built suburban neighborhood filled with wide streets and cul-de-sacs. And as the man backs out of the driveway, he waves goodbye to his wife and begins his daily 20-minute commute to his 9-to-5 office job. The man arrives 5 minutes early and at the end of the day leaves 5 minutes late. The man then commutes home, where he and his wife make dinner together whilst doing miscellaneous chores throughout the house. And after dinner, the man and his wife sit back to watch an episode of their favorite TV show and browse the internet for baby supplies. And finally, at the end of the day, the man cleans up and checks his email before retiring for the evening. This is the average American's everyday life and is the norm for millions of American citizens in the present year of 2026. On the surface, this man's life seems perfectly normal and uncomplicated. However, this cycle endlessly repeats, day in and day out. The next day, the man will wake again and perform the same daily ritual of workplace demands and household chores. Then again and again with no variation. The man is tired. With office deadlines and goals, the man is unable to form deep, meaningful relationships with his peers, as they are too busy responding to their job-related responsibilities to take the necessary time and effort needed to make a friendship or to take any deeper interest in the man and his young family. The man is lonely. And even furthermore, the man's bosses continuously assign him with numerous projects, whilst only providing the man a 1-hour lunch break to relieve himself of his grueling workloads. And at home, the man and his wife must continuously do chores around the house to keep their home clean and must keep to the budget they've set for the month. The man is stressed. What opportunity does the man have to alleviate the challenges of his daily life? Where can he go? The average American has no place of reprieve to foster deep relationships, create a novelty in this daily life, or to relieve the ever-growing stress that plagues people's lives perpetually. This is the failure of the modern American suburb. The fundamental design of America's middle-class suburban developments ignores the necessity for community and has contributed heavily to a lack of place in America. The promotion of a privatized lifestyle buys into the rise of corporate retail industries and excessive isolation, thus influencing mass mental health declines and the loss of trillions of dollars in damages. The future of America depends on the people's willingness to build their country upon the principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To promote an active and healthy citizenry is to promote the freedoms that have built the worldwide power of the United States of America. The American dream is subjective, though. The goal of this thesis is not to make an overarching generalization of what all Americans want, but is rather to establish a concept that could better fulfill the desire for community connection and economic efficiency amongst those who seek its benefits. When defining a modern American suburb, one must understand the concept of a suburb. The Oxford English Dictionary defines a suburb as an outlying district of a city which is often residential, meaning that it is designated only for housing purposes. Around these residential areas are often commercial zones, which are designed to tend to the needs and wants of nearby suburban residents with supposedly accessible food and retail. The regulation between residential and commercial areas can only become possible through zoning, which is the categorizing of a parcel of land according to the restrictions placed on its desired use. This is the simplest chart I could find for this analogy. Certain plots of land are permitted for mixed-use zoning, which allow for both residential and commercial areas to be placed on the same plot of land. When looking at the current suburban landscape of America, and with these definitions, the modern American suburb can easily be defined as a series of strictly residential areas set alongside or close to strictly commercial zones, which connect these residential areas mostly via automobile-centric roadways. Sociologist Ray Oldenburg advocates against this design. Oldenburg argues that the modern American suburb suffers from a lack of place and belonging, as he argues for the concept of the third place. The third place, as Oldenburg defines it, is an informal public gathering place outside of work and home where people can go to socialize and relax. These third places have historically been achieved through the likes of parks, gardens, general stores, diners, pubs, coffee shops, barber shops, and even churches, and are ideally pedestrian friendly and set within a walkable distance of nearby suburban areas. Walkable meaning a 10-minute walk or less. When looking at when valuing both economic efficiency and community connectedness, the modern American suburb truly has failed greatly. And a solution, according to Oldenburg, the only solution, can be achieved by the efficient implementation of an accessible, pedestrian-friendly third place into America's future suburban developments. To claim a complete absence of the third place in America is to be ignorant. Yet to claim a complete and efficient implementation of the third place in America is to be irrational. This thesis will go over America's flawed commercial design that has influenced the current suburban landscape, the historical blueprint that has overcome these flaws, and the isolation, stress, and individualist culture that has resulted from America's flawed development. The most prevalent suburban design of America's communities lack the particular gathering place necessary to encourage the ideal active citizenry and allow for a flourishing economy. A large portion of the American population is in dire need of a stress-free, socially active environment, as Oldenburg argues for the third place as the ultimate solution to America's failed suburban design, addressing the lack of place in America. To understand how the United States grew to be so disconnected, one must understand the effects of post-war America. 80 years ago, with the baby boom of the 1950s, a large portion of the American population began migrating from bustling cities to newly developing suburban neighborhoods. This influx of suburban population, along with the baby boom of that time, was largely influenced by the popularization of the automobile and the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 that declared that $25 billion be invested into an interstate highway system which would bring on a new landscape for American living. Despite the rapid growth of suburban America, however, the retail industry would take years to catch up. From the 1950s to the 1990s, this retail industries would slowly grow towards the new suburban sprawl, largely due to the popularization of the big box retailing center in the 1960s. These big box retail centers can be seen in the likes of Walmart, Kroger, and Target, and are largely prevalent in American society today. They grew in popularity due to their supposed ability to provide efficient access to all amenities in one big store. As Peter Lemon and Deborah C. Moy indicate in a study studying the prevalence of the retail industry in suburban America, they found that in the 1950s, roughly 650,000 suburban residents occupied one retail center. However, by the 1990s, this number went down to 4,600 residents per retail center. America was growing bigger, faster, and further than ever before. However, this rapid accelerating growth of big box retail in suburban America came at a cost. These new shopping centers began largely ignoring the necessity for community and pushing more reliance on the automobile as the main mode of transportation. With the automobile being the main vehicle at which people navigate these new commercial areas, there was just less emphasis on creating a safe public environment for people. Thus, nonetheless, the previous main streets, parks, and churches began disappearing in place of a car-dependent wasteland of commercial retail. For years, main streets across the nation had successfully structured small-town America with their unpretentious pedestrian-friendly storefronts. These main streets had proven sufficient for providing efficient dining, shopping, and leisure for all who sought its benefits. And Oldenburg advocates for these main streets as catalysts for community and viable third places. These main streets can also function as ecosystems. When one store closes, it is likely that another will be erected in its place. And when that store closes, another in its place. And so on for years to come. This is the circle of Main Street life. Although the Main Street is not the only means at achieving an efficient implementation of a third place in American society, it certainly is proven great at it. The current corporate retailing environment of America does not allow for such flexibility or longevity. An article by watchdog organization Good Jobs First observes that some big box retail centers can occupy upwards of 250,000 square feet of retail space. This design is inefficient as 99.9% of all American businesses are small businesses and thus cannot benefit from such a large square footage. When a big box retailing center closes, it is unlikely that another will open in its place or be open in its place for a long period of time. And therefore, big box retailing centers cannot foster the same ecosystem as the American Main Street. These big box retailing centers, these 250,000 square foot complexes are continuing, once closed, lay abandoned, wasting valuable space, time, and money that could better benefit the community and the economy in other, more efficient ways. However, still, these big box supercenters hold a monopoly over the current suburban commercial landscape of America whilst isolating millions in the process. Isolation in any society can have detrimental effects. The most extreme instance of the most severe isolation happened 6 years ago, with the shutdown that resulted from the COVID-19 pandemic. At this time, an 18-year-old named Dylan Buckner was getting ready for the 2020 football season. He was the quarterback at Glenbrook North High School in Northbrook, Illinois, and was considered an incredibly socially active and intelligent kid. Along with getting scholarship offers from MIT, Oberlin, and Augustana, he was also credited as having an excellent work ethic and a selfless mindset amongst his teammates. Dylan had much promise for his future. However, with the COVID-19 shutdown, the 2020 football season was canceled, and Dylan was told to stay indoors and social distance. He was now fully isolated from his community and his favorite activities, which would have a deep toll on his mental health. Unfortunately, Dylan's promising future would not be realized, as on January 7, 2021, Dylan would tragically take his own life. In the wake of his death, it was said that Dylan did have a history of depression. However, that it had become exacerbated by the cancellation of the 2020 football season amid the dangers of COVID-19. Outside of the devastation that the pandemic brought upon the households of millions, it also showcased the true deadly effects of widespread isolation in American society. Dylan Buckner was an incredibly socially active and intelligent kid until he was told to isolate himself from his community, resulting in his suicide. Millions more suffer from this reality. 6 years after the COVID-19 pandemic, 3 years after the pandemic has been declared over. Why is this? In fact, the National Institute of Mental Health says that nearly 1 in 3 Americans have reported weekly loneliness or mental health issues. Why is this? What has influenced Americans to be so isolated and influenced this mass mental health decline? Well, with the rising popularity of online communities and the lack of a physical, convenient place for people to form true community, people have resulted to social media as a viable community center. However, social media cannot achieve the same benefits as a third place. Micheline Duclef cites a poll by Pew Research Center suggesting social media's role in instead increasing mental health issues, especially amongst young adults. Thus, social media is limited in its ability to provide an active and healthy citizenry just as the third place can. The COVID-19 pandemic specifically showcased a world ruled by individual isolation, leading to a world that considers community a luxury and considers convenience more important than community. And even though this COVID-19 pandemic is the most recent example that showcased extreme isolation, the detrimental effects of isolation are nothing new. In 1892, Charlotte Perkins Gilman published her short story, The Yellow Wallpaper, as a response to a treatment of isolation and depression isolation and rest given to women suffering from postpartum depression. The story tells the tale of a woman and her husband, John, who moved to a large country house for the summer. John is a physician and prescribes his wife, the narrator, suffering from postpartum depression, with a rest cure. The woman, the narrator, is then confined to an upstairs nursery filled with ugly yellow wallpaper and is barred from any working, writing, or extensive human contact until she is cured. As the story goes on, the woman begins to devolve into insanity. As documented in a hidden journal of hers, she expresses her belief that there is a woman trapped within the yellow wallpaper. As she begins to devolve more and more into insanity, she begins to become more and more engrossed in the woman supposedly trapped within the yellow wallpaper. Finally, her curiosity gets the best of her, and she finally locks herself in the nursery and tears down the yellow wallpaper to supposedly free the woman trapped within. However, in her delusion, the narrator makes the conclusion that she herself was the woman trapped within the yellow wallpaper. This story was written as a comment on the oppression of women in the 19th century. However, it presents an argument on the importance of mental health that stands relevant today. Perhaps the narrator's claim of herself being the woman trapped within the yellow wallpaper were not fully delusional. The yellow wallpaper in its ideology represents inescapable entrapment, and thus a parallel is formed. The average American, according to this definition, lives every day trapped within the yellow wallpaper. Americans are forced to function as robots in their daily lives, entrapped in their daily routines, and unable to escape its repetitive nature. This is not how humans were designed. Humans were not designed to be robots. In fact, in Ecclesiastes 4:9 through 10, the Bible commands people to be socially active, stating, "Two are better than one, because they have good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up." Humans were designed to be social creatures, and the Bible commands people to commune and to lift each other up. However, American culture prioritizes the opposite. With the physical separation as a result of America's failed suburban design, people are beginning to become more self-interested in themselves, more interested in themselves overall, prioritizing convenience and self-indulgence over community and efficiency. Humans should instead prioritize humanity's natural longing for social interaction and community connection. However, this is simply not the case in America today, as people are prioritizing convenience over community. Yet still, perhaps the third place could alleviate the stresses, the isolation, and the individualist culture, and the repetitive nature of American society. The third place provides an option. Although it does not guarantee community, it certainly provides a platform in which community can form and flourish. Yet still, isolation and stress are continuing to encumber the citizens of the United States, growing worse every year. This isolation and stress has influenced skyrocketing obesity rates, narcotic overconsumption rates, and the loss and mass consumerism amongst Americans, costing Americans their mental and physical health, trillions of dollars in debt every year, and even their own lives. Additionally, the extreme car dependency has harmed the environment, has costed local governments millions of dollars a year in road maintenance, and has risked American lives in the process. Something is clearly amiss, and something must change. The third place is the hope for the future of America and its citizens, as it does promote this active, this healthy citizenry that promotes the freedoms and liberties that have built the worldwide power of the United States of America. So, from the skyscrapers of New York City to the rural towns scattered across the nation, the United States of America should be the greatest country on earth. However, the current suburban landscape of America undermines this sentiment. Americans are suffering from extreme isolation, stress, and individual interest as a result of America's suburban design. America has decided to pave over the previous main streets, parks, and churches that had successfully structured small-town America and helped influence and encourage community. America must understand its priorities. Why is America prioritizing convenience over community? Is America's pursuit of happiness being pursued in the right direction? Perhaps America can pursue convenience and its happiness through better means. The only solution to America's failed suburban design can be achieved by the efficient implementation of an accessible, pedestrian-friendly third place into America's future suburban developments. And so in the dewy mist of this brisk spring morning, let it be known the true necessity of an accessible third place in American society. And to all Americans, good morning and thank you. I would now like to take questions from the judges.
Luke, I have a question. First of all, well done.
Thank you.
Good presentation. So moving forward, what's the best way that we can accomplish this? Because we've already kind of shifted away from it. So how do we recenter onto this? Because I think everybody would agree that that picture of the American Main Street is a lot more appealing than what we see here.
It definitely looks more favorable. I think I delve into this in my paper. However, I wasn't able to fit it into the presentation, but I talk about the aspects of like implementing an efficient third place and the idea of a mixed-use development. I don't mention it as much. I define it in my presentation, however, I don't mention it as much in my presentation. However, mixed-use developments people are hesitant to take advantage of mixed-use developments as a way of implementing a third place, as they question its supposed ability to hopefully bring back on economic benefits. And certainly, immediately, it does cost more to build these mixed-use developments. However, over time, its longevity outweighs this immediate cost in a sense. The way that we can implement this, however, I think is just through a reprioritization of how we design our communities, for a reformation of the strict zoning laws, which is an argument in itself. Just trying to implement these third places back into society, especially the church has been an example of a third place being kind of, with lack of a better term, weaned out of the center of America. It has conformed to America's desire for car dependency, and you can see this. The culture around the church has not used it as community, rather has seen it as just a thing to do, as a place to go. People go to church, they go to Sunday school, they go to big church, and then they beat the crowds to lunch. That's the whole priority. However, church historically has been a necessity has been the central point of community, especially in small town America, and especially in American history, in history in general. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
You've painted a very compelling picture of the problem. And I think you hit on something that I've thought a lot about. I lived in Chicago. I've lived in South Korea, both places where people just don't have cars as much. Mm-hmm. I'd like to hear you talk a little bit more about how I think Americans underestimate the problem that it is to have cars. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean pollution, but I mean, so talk about how cars are driving the problem, and then a vision for life without cars. Or with fewer cars.
The concept of the automobile itself isn't inherently bad. However, it stemmed from the fact that America began to design around the automobile instead of humans. So I'm thinking it's just this culture has been designed around the automobile. American cities have been built around the automobile, and people think that this is the only way that life can function. However, it is true that people are unaware to the true benefits of having a pedestrian-friendly community, a community that encourages community, or a community that encourages people to connect for social interaction, encourages people to go out, to walk, to feel, to slow down in a sense. And it certainly has been seen in the busyness of Americans in their daily lives. It kind of plays into Abram's thesis in that people just feel like they're driving constantly. In fact, my dad was saying on the phone the other day that he's living in Houston now for his job, and he says, man, it feels like I'm driving all the time. It feels like that's all that I'm doing. Because Houston is very, very car dependent, and it definitely does not, and as much as it advertises a better life for people, it certainly doesn't seem like it in practice. So I hope that answers your question. All right.
Luke, does the burden of this rely on city leaders or like urban planners, or does the burden rely on individuals?
So the burden, the effects of it.
To fix it. if you're talking
To
about
fix it.
solutions?
Okay, so it lies on the priorities of especially the government, the local governments, and developers. So developers are especially hesitant to implement these third places into mixed-use development specifically because they are sacrificing possible land that they could use for housing. And whenever, with these developments that do implement a third place of some kind or a commercial area, they are charged a luxury. These developments are charged for a luxury. So however, my argument is that these mixed-use developments, if designed correctly, if designed around efficiency, both economic efficiency and providing this walkable infrastructure for people, it's certainly, if people can see that benefit, that the burden definitely lies on the developers to take the initial hit, as it is more money up front to build a mixed-use suburban neighborhood, but to see the benefits, the longevity, the communities that form, the healthy environment that forms from these mixed-use developments. So I hope that answers your question in a sense.
I think it's super interesting, but I guess another question I have is, you talk about the suburban landscape being filled with retail centers, and you touched on this a little bit. I guess I just want to dive a little bit deeper on this. Why are these retail centers, shopping centers in suburban landscapes, why are those not sufficient third places, in your opinion?
So, I mean, except for teenagers.
People gather there. I mean, that's where I'm going.
They aren't efficient implementations of a third place. And there's a differentiating aspect of that. I'm arguing for the efficient implementation of a pedestrian-friendly third place into America, which means to try and bring this closer to people, to make, instead of people using the car to get there, people walk. And people can go out and walk to these places. I think they are third places. However, they are not efficient implementations of third places, as they aren't within a walkable distance, in my definition, within a walkable distance of a nearby suburban residence or residential area. Yeah.
That was very interesting, Luke. Very
you.
interesting. Well, I think research shows most European countries, people are less obese than we are because they walk everywhere.
Exactly.
I too love that picture. We all want to live in a Hallmark movie.
Oh yes, of
Yes.
course.
So in your research, are there areas of our country, of the United States, that have more places like that than others? And if so, did your research show what was life like there?
This is more of my experience. However, there are developments around America, not specific places, but mainly like all around America, where these small developments that implement these shops are prevalent. So if anybody knows the Provenance suburban district over in South Shreveport, I go there to get my hair cut for some reason. It's a 40-minute drive.
Well, it looks good today.
It looks. Thank you so much. That's why I go over there. That development, every time I go over there, there's always life, like flourish. It seems like everyone is out there. They're always at a bench talking. And I decided that I would interview some of these people and try and find out, do you live in this neighborhood? What do you think of this place? No one that I interviewed lived in that neighborhood. And I don't think that supports the idea that, people are willing, I think that supports the idea that people are willing to go out of their way to drive to other places, to inconvenience themselves, go out of their way to find these places and to foster community. Every single person that I interviewed did not live there. And that was the most shocking statistic that I found from my own, wandering and frolicking around in the seating area next to the coffee shop. It certainly seems like a very, just the idea of a kid just frolicking in the grass as you're drinking a coffee. It's a great idea. and it certainly has proven to be efficient in real life, at least from what I've seen. So I hope that answers
It
your
does.
question.
That was very interesting.
Thank you. Alrighty, so if there are no other questions, we can be done. Thank you so much.